Get ready and start your engines for our 5th annual Aviation Month on Savvy Business Radio. Our official sponsor is Winty Graphic Design, your one-stop shop for all your graphic needs, from business cards, logos, book covers, and banners. Contact Winty today in order to find out how your custom design can become a reality at 718-841-7441. Our 5th annual Aviation Month logo was done by Winty. Welcome to Savvy Business Radio. This is your host, Christina Nitschmann. Our first guest today is author Bob Richards, sharing exciting details from his book, Secrets from the Tower. His book gives readers the inside look of life of an air traffic controller in one of the world's busiest airports, O'Hare Airport. Find out more about Bob and get his book today at bobrichardsbooks.com. Our second guest is Dan Pimentel, photographer and graphic designer who has been published nationally over the last 5 decades. Along with his very popular blog, Airplanista, his articles have appeared in notable publications such as Flying Magazine, AOPA Pilot, EAA Sport Aviation, and Air and Space Smithsonian. Find out more about Dan at airplanista.com. Hi, Bob. Welcome to Savvy Business Radio. How are you today?
I'm just fine, Christina. How are yourself?
I'm doing fabulous, and you might be interested to know that you are starting our 5th annual Aviation Month this year. This is the 5th year we've been doing this, and it's been extraordinary for Savvy. I mean, most of our listeners are not pilots, but oddly enough, the public has a great fascination for all things that fly, and you've had an incredible career. I read your book about 2-3 years ago, and you've worked at O'Hare Airport as an air traffic controller. And I knew nothing about this. I actually have taken some flying lessons and was always petrified to talk to you guys, scared that I'd mess up on the air, and a little intimidated by what y'all do over there. But today I'm hoping you can alleviate some people's fear about air traffic control and share a little bit about your awesome experiences, which are covered in your wonderful book, Secrets from the Tower. How did you come to working as an air traffic controller?
Actually, I went into the military. It's a long story short. I was in the military, but I've always been interested in aviation. Where I lived in Chicago was right along the flight path of the longest runway, 32 left at the time. Uh-huh. And literally, when we were playing football in the field, I mean, these 747s would come right over the field, DC-10s, and we whatever we were doing, we're playing football or whatever, we'd have to stop if we were talking to each other, and then wait, and then start talking again. And that got to be so habitual and normal to us that we would just do it normally without even thinking about the fact that there's an airplane. But we were always incredibly, curious about what was going on, because it seemed like we could take our football and just throw it up there and hit it. Yeah. So that's one of the reasons I got interested. Then I went through the service and in the Air Force. And then right after the strike, I was on the guard duty. And then all the military reservists, Air Force, Marines, Navy, they got called back to active duty for a little off the strike, and that's basically how I got into it, the military.
That is so cool, because I don't know if we chatted before the interview a couple weeks ago, but in high school, right when the strike happened, we had people from the government come into our school, because I was like in 11th grade or 12th grade, and they were trying to see which one of us might be interested to enter in to become an air traffic controller, and to tell us a little bit about what the lifestyle would be like, that they would send us to, I think, Dallas to be trained or something. But they gave us like a little prep test to get an idea like who might be a possible candidate. And I was like, this is great, because I always want to enter into the universe of aviation so that I could fly about the world. And I thought, I can't imagine being a pilot at the time, but I thought this might be the way to do it. But due to my dyslexia, it didn't quite work out for me. But what intrigued me about your book is the title is Secrets from the Tower, an O'Hare air traffic controller's personal story of life and aviation. And when I heard Secrets from the Tower, I was like, wow, what secrets do you have? So
there's a few.
There is. It was a lot of fun. When you got started, was it what you expected when you were training or before you got into it? Did you know anything about air traffic control before you started working in it?
No, I really didn't know. I had a kind of sense of what it might be like, but it wasn't until I started training that I realized this was going to be for me, and it was fun. And that 25 years I worked as a controller went by so fast. I mean, that's just how much fun we had. I mean, to get paid for something you really enjoy the way we did, and get paid incredibly good amounts of money, I guess, at O'Hare, because we were probably the highest paid controllers in the country. But forget that. I mean, I would have worked there for, half the pay. I mean, it was just that much fun because you were nonstop talking and honing your craft. And most people, as air traffic controllers across the country, don't get to do that at a busy airport, believe it or not. I mean, you think of air traffic controllers, the people that work at the New Yorks, the LAs, and Chicago, those are far and few in between compared to the rest of the country.
Oh my gosh, yes. I live in Brooklyn, New York, and my partner is a pilot. So we go to Republic Airport, and it's near the Class B airspace, which I call big boy airspace, where all the Kennedy Airport, LaGuardia. And so the minute we take off, we're talking to all over the place. And it kind of scared me just being a passenger, like, oh my gosh, how do you fly the airplane and navigate talking on the radio and everything? It's a big challenge, but you guys are there to keep everyone safe. And that's one thing I don't think the public realize, how important and what a service you guys provide, keeping us safe up there, moving metal, as they call our tin, and these big airplanes. I mean, how many is it like per day, Bob, around the country? Like 70,000 flights or something around the entire country? Yeah,
at least in the air at any one time during the day. And I mean, I think you can't, the probability of something going wrong and the safety record, and there was a stretch of, I think, 2011 for almost 3 years where there wasn't one commercial fatality. Now, obviously, private aviation has its share, but in commercial aviation, there wasn't one fatality. And I think it was until the crash up in Buffalo, that was the first time within 3-4 years that they had any kind of incident. The Colgan air crash, as a matter of fact, was what it was. As I remember. But the amount of airplanes versus, people and everything else is just, it's staggering what kind of numbers you do, 0.00 something percent safety record. I mean, it's just unbelievable. Yeah. They're in a safer place in the world. That is absolutely true. Not a safer place in the world. Now, when you got started, did you start working at O'Hare at the beginning of your career, or did you work at smaller airports? No. I started out in my civil career, civilian career. I started out in L.A., outside of L.A., a small airport outside of L.A., one of the busiest airports outside of L.A., and that sort of got me into looking to see what busy traffic was really like. And so when I went to O'Hare, it wasn't small airplanes where I was really busy. It was big airplanes where I was really busy. Yeah. And that's usually how it works. It works like a farm system, just like baseball. And they call the kid up from the big, the minor leagues, and they come to the big leagues. Yeah. But every once in a while, you get a phenom, just like a Kobe Bryant did in basketball, come right out of high school, and they can go to Chicago, not New York. But that's such far and few in between that rarely ever happens. Yeah. Well, it doesn't sound like you had a boring day ever at your job doing that. No, every day was different. Every day I wrote about and I put it together, and gladly so, because not only did I was able to write a book, I'm going to write another book. And then also it's going to be a TV series. It's just going to start production very shortly, and as the director. That's so cool. So how is that going to work? Is that going to be like a documentary where you follow air traffic controllers, or is it going to be your... No, it's going to be what I would say called a dramedy, but mostly a lot of drama. And it's going to be based on many of the stories that I know about or have told already, and stuff from the book. But the book, don't forget, even though it's like 260 some odd pages, it's basically a cliff notes of my career and some of the stories. To get into more detail, you really need a different type of, venue, and certainly TV can do that. And so we'll be looking at a comedy drama, because it has a lot of light moments, as opposed to a lot of drama as well. Yeah, you got to keep it light in order to not lose your mind, I would assume. Oh, we do crazy things. I mean, we do something you probably have never seen in any business. In fact, across the country, in our tower was probably the only one. We were allowed to play we had a boom box where we could blare, rock and roll music, which most of us were into rock and roll. So while we're talking to airplanes, we would basically be listening to music and kind of spurring us on, and that kind of thing. And that's not unlike, I have a friend who's a cardiac surgeon, and he listens to Rolling Stones tapes while he's doing, heart surgery. It just makes him, it gives him that, little push, Yeah.
Yeah, wow. Well, it gave me a whole new appreciation. I fly with my partner now, and I have an absolute utter respect for what you guys do. And I'm not scared by what you do, the air traffic controllers, because I know you're there to protect us, and you have, as you said, the best safety record in any industry that I've ever seen. And so thank you all for keeping us safe. Would you say, now you had a lot of funny stories. Is there any one that you'd like to share with our audience of your time working at O'Hare?
Yeah, I think so. There's so many of them. I guess the biggest thing was, when you're talking about air traffic controllers, we really want to be, and you brought up the point earlier about being, almost afraid sometimes talking to us.
Yes.
And we really don't want that more than anything else. We want a relaxed pilot. And so what we won't tolerate in the tower is someone who does start riding pilots, who does start getting angry, or who does say, might even call names or something. And usually we dealt with that by, we had a particular person, we used to call him Volcano Man, and he would do that constantly. Every once in a while, he get so upset so easily, and he says, look, you got to relax. You're here to provide a service, and people are going to make mistakes. But he didn't listen. So what we did was, we went on one of the handheld radios, not in the tower, but one of the backup radios, and we pretended to be a pilot. Just to drive him crazy. We had a pilot on one frequency, which was called clearance to delivery, which was taxiing him out of the gate. We kept him on that frequency, didn't give him to him on ground control.
Okay.
And so he was issuing controls on ground control, and then we would tell the pilot the opposite thing to do, which absolutely drove him insane. Because he would say, okay, now turn left, head running 2 to left. Then the other guy who's really talking to him would say, turn right, we'll get your W back. And he just kept doing this. And outbound ground control O'Hare is the only frequency probably in the world where pilots aren't allowed to, or usually don't have time to respond. We just rattle out a bunch of instructions to 10, 15 different airplanes at one time. That's how busy it is. No time for even acknowledgments. Our acknowledgement is to see that they're doing what they're supposed to.
Wow.
So we kept doing this to this guy, and he turned left, turn right, and then we went as far as to say, oh, looks like there's a clown out here. The other controller told him to stop, and he goes, there's a clown out here. Could you do something about this clown? And the guy's looking for a clown because there's a clown. So now he calls the city up and says, there's a clown. I mean, we just let this guy keep rolling. And people were on the floor laughing so hard. And finally he looked up and saw it and got the message that, hey, you got to be, this is our reputation too, not just yours. I mean, if you say bad things, people are going to think, oh, here's a bad tower. And we want people to feel good and comfortable, because I'll tell you something else. A comfortable pilot has saved us in a lot of situations.
Really?
Where there might have been something happen on the ground that could have been really bad, and someone else pointed out besides the controller. And so everybody works together on that.
Yeah. And I like that you mentioned that working together. My second flight ever, when I went out for a lesson with my teacher, we were given directions once we got close to the airport about landing, and they told us to make a 180 and go here or something. I forgot the exact what he told us to do.
Make a left 180 back to final, left 180 back to base, something like that.
Something like that, yeah. And when he told us to do that, I said, oh, okay. And my teacher was like, no. Do you see what would happen if we follow those directions? We'll be right in the path of that airplane heading in the same direction. He'll be heading straight for our windshield. You can't just blindly take orders and not think about what the consequences are. You have to imagine in your head, if you take this course correction, where would it lead you? And, does it lead you in front of another plane? Well, then you need to call them and say, unable, and here's why. Oh, I'm sorry, that was meant for another airplane. Go on.
One of the reasons air traffic control is so safe is there are so many backups to it and so many people with their eyes on it. I mean, you have a pilot, is particularly commercial, you have a pilot, you have a co-pilot, you have somebody deadheading on the airplane. Sometimes you have a third crew member. And in the towers now, especially the big towers, we have what's called a local monitor. And we have a controller now who simply plugs into the person working the airplanes in the position. And his job is to monitor and just keep an eye out for the controller and the planes that he's working. So there's a lot of built-in safety that we've developed over the last 10, 15 years just alone.
Yeah. And I was amazed, Bob, when I'm traveling with my partner that, when they give you a heading, especially when you're in IFR, meaning traveling by instrument only and you're not traveling by visual reference, that, you're supposed to keep your heading. You get off by, I think, 200 feet, up or down, in altitude. They send up an alarm in the air traffic controller, green or office, right?
Right. There's a conflict alert depending on what the separation standards are for what area you're in. But around the big airports, it's usually 1,000 feet, and then across from plane to plane, 3 miles across. But the computer recognizes when you start dropping below 900 feet, it'll go off, and you'll be able to see it there. Are they descending into the airplane below them, or are they climbing into the airplane above them? But that system was digitalized about 20 years ago, and since that, we've actually built in more separation because of that. Because before we were looking at measurements with the finals on the big airports, they'd be like 3 miles apart coming in, and if they got to 2.9 on the computer, ding ding ding. But if they got 2.9, because we were looking at visually on the radar by dash lines. Each dash line was a mile. That's how we did it. That was our 3 miles, 3 dash lines.
Wow.
So it could have been 2.9, it could have been 2.8, it could be 3.1, 3.2. We don't know. Once it digitalized, it went to 2.9, went the caca, as we call it, went off. And so then you have people now building in, instead of 3 miles, they go to 4 miles because they don't want to hear that thing go off at 2.9, when there's really not a problem with the airplanes, hitting or anything like that.
Yeah. Well, one thing that intrigued me, Bob, reading your book, is I was surprised at some of the time frames that you get, like how they set up your schedules. Like sometimes you'll be working a day shift and the next day the night shift. And I thought it was kind of like being an ER doctor or something. And being the safety record of air traffic control, I was really surprised that you guys could operate in really different time frames on, different schedules each week.
Well, that's open to debate as to how well we work that system. But the reason it's in place, 2 nights, 2 days, and a midnight, is that if we put everybody, particularly at O'Hare, on straight shifts, like one crew would be working, let's say, all night shifts. One crew would be working all, late day shifts, like 2 to 10. And another crew would be working midnights. Well, it would never distribute evenly the workload. Somebody would be getting pounded all the time, while the other two groups would have it easy. They wouldn't have it as hard. And so you kind of want to spread out this incredible workload, equally among everybody. And that's how they do it, by splitting up everybody working different shifts.
Well, that makes sense to me now, because I was like sitting there like, that's got to be crazy. How do you all
get... But on the flip side of that, when you got that day 4 of your work week and you work a 7 to 3, you got to go back at 11 o'clock at night, work the midnight shift. And there's only 8 hours on the clock. And that does not include driving home and everything else. So you're not going to get 8 hours of sleep. That's a guarantee. And they've been looking at ways, because that's always been a complaint. Because when we start getting people who give errors because of, I'm too tired, or this like that, or I'm fatigued, or even working 6-day weeks, which has been kind of quite common, especially right now. Yeah. Because of the shortage of controllers right now. Big shortage going on right now.
You hear that, everyone?
What's that?
I said, you hear that, everyone in the audience? Anyone ever want to be air traffic controller? Go do your research.
Now's the time. I know they're taking applications and tests and everything else. So you have a good shot of getting in if you apply now. In fact, I'm as late as I know a few days ago, a bunch of people I talked to were kids were getting involved in it and stuff, and a few have been accepted even. So nice. They'll go to the city, and they'll go to Oklahoma City and do their training, and hopefully get out to some small airport in the country. Yeah. But it's not easy. No, it's not easy. I mean, to give you an example from the book, it's caused a lot of medical problems. We've had 6 people die of, that I worked with 38, 39, I'm sorry, 29, 30, 38, 39, 43, 46. And since then, a few more have died, and it's all heart issues and stuff. And in 5 of those cases, it was just suddenly. And that's pretty young to be leaving the earth, and with young families and everything.
Now, there's stress, right? Is that a big component of why air traffic controllers might have died early? Is stress?
No, I think it's not stress so much. It's adrenaline. You work on adrenaline when you work that many airplanes, because you're talking like an auctioneer, nonstop, 6 out of the 8 hour shifts, and it's just when you're young, you think, I can do this. This is like playing a video game on steroids. But as you get older, and at 40s and 50s, and start seeing a cardiologist, you realize that that's probably not the way to go.
So what would you say for a young guy out there or gal who's interested in joining and in becoming an air traffic controller? What do they best look for? What are some of the skill sets that someone should think about? This is what I had. This is a good skill set that they'd look for.
Well, a skill set, probably awareness, being able to think on your feet quickly. Most of the controllers we have come from all walks of life. We've had anyone from lawyers to truck drivers to ex-military there's no group of people in other occupations that come into that occupation that works any better or less. It's just a question of how good they are, how smart they are. Are they mathematically inclined to be able to figure out, things in 3D, but three-dimensional.
Yes.
In other words, you see an airplane at 8,000, you see an airplane at 4,000, you see an airplane at 6,000. What do you know what to do? Can you fast forward what's going to happen next? That kind of thing.
I was going to say, I would assume it also would take good visual component, that you really are good visually, because my partner as a pilot is really good with situational awareness and visually being able to say where all airplanes are around him visually in his head. Not a skill that everyone has. I know I don't have it.
Yeah, and it's not a problem. If you wear Coke bottle glasses, you could probably still be a controller as long as you have corrected vision. So, that's not an issue. But, it is definitely, there's some special qualities that are really hard to pin down other than the fact, like I said, think on your feet, be able to imagine things three-dimensionally and, be able to react quickly and not be afraid.
Yeah. And for pilots listening, because we do have more pilots listening in and on Aviation Month. And as you said in the beginning of our conversation, they often get nervous and a little frightened, especially when they're a student pilot, having to talk to ATC, air traffic control. What would be your advice to, say, a new student pilot out there who's getting started and learning to speak on the radio?
Well, the number one thing is not to be afraid to ask a question. If there's any question in your mind about anything at all, don't ever feel that you're being too stupid or that's a dumb question. There's no such thing as a dumb question. We would rather you ask the question than face something really dire because you didn't ask that question.
Yeah. And not only that, you have to think about when you're up there, you're affecting a bunch of other aircraft where it's not just you.
I've seen pilots time and again who do things on their own, contrary to maybe what you asked them, or just something unusual, and without questioning it or without saying anything about it. And when they just could have just simply asked a simple question, we could have helped them out. Because then you go back to them and says, well, I didn't want to bother you. Or that's another thing too. Well, you're too busy. We're never too busy to help somebody out. Never.
Yeah.
You need something, you call us right away. Do not hold back, because not only are you and you might be in trouble, but you might be putting somebody else in trouble as well. So important to, again, not fear asking questions, please. I say we say that all the time to groups that we talk to.
Yeah, absolutely.
People are intimidated, just like you said. Yeah. Some people think we're God. I don't know why, but we're not God. Believe me.
We
make mistakes too.
Yeah, absolutely. You're human. We have some air traffic controllers, especially as I said, by Republic Airport in New York, where it's, you start entering into the class Bravo airspace, which is Kennedy, LaGuardia, all of the huge airports. And they're really racing. It's like an auctioneer. They're talking fast. They're very focused. And they really can be a little intimidating when you're a student pilot. But as my partner said, who's also a pilot, he said it's the best place to train in if you, really practice before you get in the air, so you're not like fudgeting and scared. It will alleviate some of your fears if you practice ahead of time the orientation of how you say what you have to say, so that you can actually listen when you're given instructions.
Right. I know a lot of pilots, particularly student pilots and young people getting started, that they'll sit at home, wherever that, get their VHF radio out and just listen to the transmissions if they live close to an airport or radar facility or anything like that.
Yeah.
Because you can hear a lot and learn a lot just from doing that sometimes.
Yeah. And we have live ATC now, liveatc.net, where you can listen to airports around the country. Totally awesome tool that I've used in the past. And can I ask you have you ever had, while you worked or yourself had, a pilot in distress where you had to help them out, maybe land the airplane or anything like that?
Oh, yeah. I've had several. Boy, oh boy. I've had an American with no gear coming into land, trying to keep him, plane level by telling him, second to second, where he was on the glide path, how's it looking, what's the wind, all that stuff. I mean, we've had that countless times. I can't, and then you get situations where really common every day is medical emergencies. Somebody's got to get to the gate. Somebody's had a heart attack. Somebody's unconscious. Child's a hemophiliac. And so as a ground controller, you've got to really work intensely to move all the airplanes out of the way to get that one airplane to the gate. And that gets really chaotic too. But you do it because that's, it's somebody's life. It could be your kid's life for all you know, right? So you have to imagine, what would you do if it was somebody you knew, in that situation.
Wow. Well, a couple of years ago when I was flying with someone, their battery went out. And so we had lost, because it was a glass cockpit, we lost all of the radios, all of the instruments. And we were like, oh my gosh, how are we going to land? And I was like trying to remember, because when that happened and you're not able to use the radio, there's a way for you to use light signals to guide airplanes down. Did that ever happen to you where you had to use the light signals as well to guide an airplane down to the ground?
Yeah, we did. We had a UPS on final that lost, same situation actually, lost his batteries. He had no landing lights. He had no radio. He had nothing. And in fact, as we got him, they had already been vectored towards the runway. So we knew he was going to head towards the runway. So if he lost his radio, we knew what he was going to do. So as he got a little closer to the runway, probably I'd say within 4 miles of the airport, we got our light gun out. The only problem was we didn't realize that he was landing 32 right, was right over the international terminal. And he finally got his radio back within 2 miles of the airport and said, we're going down. And if he had gone down when he said he was going down, he would have went right into that international terminal. Whoa. But somehow he got it restarted the engines, and hop skipped over the terminal and put it on the ground real hard.
Whoa.
But yeah, of course we had the light gun was on the whole time, flashing green. He knew we knew he was coming, and in that situation, if we didn't want him to land there, we would have flashed the red light. But if he was committed, he would have just ignored the red light anyway, because pilot's has the final command. So doesn't mean just because we say something that they have to do it. If they judge something is much more prudent, then they're going to do it. There's the final command, not us.
Yeah. And people forget about that. And when it happened, it's right now the movie Sully's out. And after that happened with him, I mean, I know there was some investigation, at least from what I heard, about did he make the right call? Did he not make the right call? I said, only people can judge as the pilot in the cockpit at that moment dealing with the situation and 100 or 200 people in his back. He has to make the proper call to get safe on the ground. And none of us, I get really annoyed when pilots and others try.
I'll tell you a real interesting story about that. I've never met Sully or talked to him, but I have met and talked to and spoke with Jeff Skiles, the co-pilot.
Yeah.
And Jeff, what people don't realize about that flight, I mean, Sully gets all the good press and everything, but Jeff had as much to do with that landing as Sully did. I mean, Jeff configured that airplane in so many different ways that you configure a jet for landing with. He did a configuration that would normally take somebody 4 or 5 minutes to do. He did it in like 30 seconds.
Whoa.
I mean, from his manuals. I mean, and a poor guy, bless his heart, he's kind of a country boy from Madison, Wisconsin. He did more to land that plane. Without him, that plane, Sully wouldn't have been able to do what he did. And those two guys worked together as a team.
Yeah.
But I've always felt bad for him, because everything you see is Sully. And my God, Jeff is just as much a part of that as Sully was.
It is. So, and that's what people forget about an aircraft, a commercial aircraft, with all, the pilot, the co-pilot, and sometimes engineer behind them, and even the flight attendants are all an integral part to keeping the flight safe.
Yeah, I don't want to take anything away from Sully. He did an amazing job. There's no doubt about that.
For sure.
I mean, he did something very few people could have pulled off. But he had another guy that pulled something off that many other people couldn't pull off either. And those two things came together at the right time for everybody.
Perfect. Yep, absolutely. Well, this has been such a fascinating talk, and I want to thank you again, Bob, and I really congratulate you on your new show. Please keep us updated so you can come back and share with our audience about your new show when it becomes live. Let them know it's going to be on HBO. It's going to be tentatively titled Out of Control, and it'll be directed by Barry Levinson. Yay. Well, we'll keep an eye out for it. And everyone go get Secrets from the Tower by Bob Richards. And can they get that at your website, Bob? Sure. secretsfromthetower.com. Fabulous. Well, I want to thank you again for coming to join us on Savvy Business Radio on our 5th annual Aviation Month. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Savvy Business Radio, home to over 500,000 listeners per month, and runs in syndication on 8 AM/FM stations nationwide, including iHeartRadio and 6 podcasting platforms. Find out how we can help you get your message out in a bigger way. Call 732-474-7375.
Here's our interview with Dan Pimentel, aviation journalist. Hi, Dan. Welcome to Savvy Business Radio. How are you today?
I'm doing great, Christina. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, you betcha. I am so blessed to have you on for our 5th annual Aviation Month at Savvy Business Radio. And you have a phenomenal history here, Dan. You've written for some of the greatest aviation magazines out there, from Flying Magazine, AOPA Pilot, EAA Sport Aviation, and Air and Space Smithsonian. I mean, just to name a few. It's so great to have you. Now, you're going to share a little bit about your background, but how it also relates and how it can help our audience who also writes content. Most of our audience are not writers per se, but they write content for their newsletters to help their audience, and sometimes do podcasting. And you're going to show them with your expertise how you can write really good stories or put together really good stories that can help your audience and your potential clients. So before we go to all of that, share a little bit about your background. What brought you to becoming a journalist, and in particular, an aviation journalist?
My story starts in 1979. I was actually a photographer, an amateur photographer, and I was a member of a auto racing team down in California. And I went to the racetrack with them one night and got out in the center of the racetrack and shot some photos on film. You remember film, right? And
yeah.
The photos that I got were like the quintessential perfect racing photo, with the car stopped nice and focused and the blurred background. Ooh. And everybody went crazy with it. And they went, "Oh my God, you got to send these to somebody." So I went home and I got them developed. You remember developing. Oh. And I sent in really nice descriptions of each picture, like what this guy was doing, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, the newspapers at the time were just kind of like weekly West Coast newspapers for racing. Loved it. They went crazy, and they did like a whole full page from Madera Speedway, blah, 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 and I went like, oh my God. And so that's how I kind of got started doing this. And that progressed until a few years later, I was working for National Speed Sport News, which at the time was, there used to be an ABC sportscaster named Chris Economaki, and he had this National Speed Sport News, and I ended up getting a gig with them. At that time, it was all free. I didn't pay anything, but I did kind of cut my teeth on journalism and was able to, I've always had a hand for writing. And so that's how I got into it. And then fast forward to 86. I got an actual paid writing gig at a newspaper, a little tiny weekly newspaper. And it sort of just progressed from there. But my aviation writing just kind of developed more like in the 90s, I would say. And that's where I am today.
Yeah, it's so cool. And most of our audience may not be professional writers, but some of them write pretty darn well, and I get their newsletters and love them. If anyone's intrigued and said, hey, I've always wanted to get some of my material published, what would be your suggestion to them to reaching out to potential newspapers or online media or even TV or radio?
The number one lesson in all of this has to be this. You need to we hear the term niche a lot. You need to be, good in your niche. I call it super niches. They're like the niche inside of a niche. And so you find out what it is, that one thing that you're really good at and that you know everything about and that you're really passionate about. Mm-hmm. And then you hone in on just that one thing. Now, don't try to write about every topic under the sun in your niche, but find like the one thing in all of that you're really good at, and then go out and find the magazine, newspaper, radio show, podcast, any of that focuses just on that niche. And that becomes a really good partnership. Then you're providing content specific to a really targeted group of people that would be interested in that. And then you go out and find whoever is delivering that content to them. And that's who you target with your content. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. And I've heard some people say, who've come on my show in the past, that they're worried about doing that because they're afraid if they niche, really super niche, that they're going to lose some money and leave money on the table. And actually, I found that to not be true, because there are a lot of people in this world. Like one guy came on a couple of years ago and said, hey, my niche is really helping people with epilepsy. But how many people in this country have epilepsy? And I said, well, actually, probably at least 1% of the entire population. Imagine that, 1% of 300 million. That's a lot of people.
No, I'll give you an example. As an aviation writer, if you use just the term aviation, that covers a lot of ground. That's airlines, that's military aviation, that's warbirds, that's vintage. There's all of that. Business aviation, jet people, helicopter people. But I focus primarily the last maybe 5 years on just general aviation, private people, private aircraft owners and pilots, the people you see at Oshkosh are my people. They're not particularly airline, not particularly military or that sort of thing, but just the typical person that owns an airplane or wants to own an airplane or maybe is learning to fly them. That's what I call my super niche. And so then but that writing about that allows me to cover more ground too. Once you get really developed in your niche and people start seeing that, hey, this person knows a lot about that, then the other stuff will come because people will seek you out and say, hey, could you write a story about this? And it might be outside of that super niche a little bit, but it's still well within the giant dome of aviation.
Yeah.
And so that's what I've done is parlayed. I focused on that one thing, but yet I do delve out a little bit into other things. But I don't think from a business standpoint, it's such a bad thing. I mean, that is a little bit different. I own an advertising agency and I've been a marketing director forever, creative director too. And so that I know a lot about how to target specific people to make them do something, buy a product, buy a service, come into the store, that sort of thing. And that's a little bit different, but still it really comes down to the philosophy behind targeting your buyer and targeting a readership of what you're writing is primarily the same. Yeah. You need to identify what it is, what's this story going to do for them, or what is this ad going to do for them? It's not about you, it's about them. And when I say them, it's not just the magazine, it's the magazine's readers. And so you need to find out what can this do for them? And once you do that, it becomes a really welcoming thing when they see a magazine, they open it up and it's information that they can use in their daily lives or whatever, or just an interesting story about an interesting person. But it's not about the writer, it's not about the magazine, it's about the person reading it.
Yeah, I love that. And it seems to me like the first step is really getting clear who is that person who is your target audience, who wants to hear, who's interested in your content. And then number two, finding out their needs, what their wants, their desires, and coming from that point, what do they want to hear? What is the topics or stories that most interest them?
Exactly.
Now, you also mentioned, I thought this was really kind of cool, how to use social media, or in particular, Twitter, to find good stories. And now I sense a lot of the folks out there might not be professional writers, but they do need good content for their podcast or their online blog. How do they use Twitter or such to find good content?
Okay, well, that's a really good question, Christina. So I have a philosophy that people think of writers as, if you ask the guy in the street, oh, you're a writer. Oh, what do you write, books? No, I write, magazine articles. But there's writers and there's journalists. And when you say, oh, I'm a journalist, they think, oh, you work at the daily paper. They somehow think that all journalists work at newspapers. I say that if you want to be any kind of a writer, whether you're writing for your blog or magazine, you need to be a journalist. And I tell in the forums that I've given on this whole subject, I tell people, go to your community college. If you've never taken a journalism class, go take Journalism 101. And you'll learn kind of how that whole thing works. And then once you have an idea that you're kind of in the back of your mind, you're seeking news, you read anything. Then when you're on Twitter, Twitter can be kind of, a lot of people think it's really complicated. I don't. I think if you learn how to do the right searching, create lists, that sort of thing for you people that are in your super niche. And I'm going back to that. Then you can find out what's really cooking in your world in real time. And so being a journalist, you can see when somebody tweets, oh, look what we just developed, this new product. That as a writer, you think, oh, I could write 5 million words on that. I'd love to do an in-depth, blah, 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 blah. But as the journalist side of you, you need to go, boom, that's a story. I could do that. That's interesting. And other people are going to find it interesting. And so Twitter is a good way to really keep up on the inner workings of your super niche. And I use tweet deck on my computer, on my MacBook, and I have saved searches. So you can do a saved searches for, I'll say, a Cessna 195 or Cirrus. Okay, so you can do you go on there and you kind of just do a search, see what people are talking about, find out what hashtags they're using when they talk about it, and then do a saved search for that hashtag. And then have that as a call, if that's your thing. Okay, then you have a column right there, and anybody in real time that talks about that subject and uses that hashtag, boom, it comes right up on your screen. So you're following your niche super niche in real time. And when that happens, I've gone from seeing something up there, finding the person, contacting them, getting them to say, yeah, I'd love to have you do a story, contacting an editor, pitching it to them, having the editor say, yeah, we'd love to pick it up. I've done that in as little as an hour.
Wow.
By using Twitter. And that goes to another topic about fast communication. If you look at it all in the mindset of a journalist, here's the biggest tip I can give you.
Okay.
Think like you're working for a daily newspaper. You're at the New York Times and you're on the daily news desk, and it's humming, everything's cooking around you, and you're like, you got to get the paper out at 8:00 tonight. It's closing. It's going to hit the press, and so you're working away on anything that comes in. You got to bang it out and you got to send it over, and they got to make a newspaper out of it. Well, that's kind of how I operate. When I I think in terms of that speed of workflow. And so then when I see a story, it's like, bam, I jump on it. And if I see something that I think will make a story, and the good news is I write for 7 different magazines, so I can see something and go, that would go great in magazine X. And so I can contact that person, and if they go, yeah, I'd love to have you do, at least try to pitch it. And I always tell people, it's not it's kind of a crapshoot, if you use that word on your radio show, to get a magazine to pick it up. But you keep trying and it works.
Yeah, I love that you're saying this, Dan, because over the years, I think journalism has gotten a bad rap. And honestly, it's a very honorable career path, as well as like a sales rep. Another thing that's gotten a bad rap. The bad rap news journalists have gotten is a kind of spin masters and such. But see, there is a way to really just take the information as is, facts only, observe it, collect the information, inform your audience, and give them an interpretation that allows them to, as I always say on my show, whatever my audience or whatever my guest or I come up with and we present before you, now it's up to you to go out and do more research and discover for yourself if this is something that you understand, if you want to take it further and learn more about it. And told me, oh, I don't like the news, or I don't like journalism or media, because they're all just like taking your information and spinning it the way they want. And that's not necessarily true. You don't have to do that for the people you do your blog for or your podcast for. You can do it in a very honorable way that gets the message out and really helps people. Because like you said, Dan, in the beginning of the conversation, this is really about the needs of the reader, the needs of the listener, and the needs of your client or potential client. So really making it about them first.
Right. Absolutely. That's rule number one.
Yes. Now, you also mentioned how you can really get a story going, get it going faster, and how to get the feel of like you're at a really busy magazine or newspaper. How do you get the information and the story really fast? I mean, some people might not be good at that. They're not a good writer. How do they really take the information and communicate it in a really quick and efficient way to their audience?
Let me back up in that I don't write it that fast.
Okay.
I craft, I guess I would say I kind of craft the pitch to the magazine that fast. And so what I do is I'll look at, I'll give an example of somebody who comes up with a new piece of avionics for your airplane. And I look at that and I'll go, wow, on the surface, that sounds like a really cool idea. Click the link, go to their website, and here they've got 8 paragraphs about their new product. You need to be able to scan that and find what is the nugget, what is the angle, what is the one thing out of all the 10 things that they just said that their product or service does, what is the one thing that's unique, that's really that jumps off the page as that's it, there's the hook. It does this better than everybody else, or it provides this much more information, or whatever. So then you have, as a journalist, thinking in terms of a daily news desk, you need to be able to scan that, find that nugget, and then you immediately contact them and say, wow, I think your piece of equipment does this so much better. I'd love to write about that. And then make the contact, pitch to the magazine, get them to, and with that information, but then I don't like write it that fast. I'm just talking in terms of identifying a potential story.
And you mentioned before we got started with the interview the importance of really doing your homework on any subject you're writing on. And I mean, I can't say that more to people who said, hey, what do I have to do to get podcast up and going, or even an online written blog? All of it requires doing your homework. You know, you don't want to just throw any old content up there. It's really about putting valuable content. And first, that means doing the research on what you're writing about, whatever the topic is going to be. Have you found any good kind of research points besides Twitter that helps you get your research done?
Not really. Being a good searcher on the internet is probably the way to go. And that, Christina, that comes back again to the super niche theory that I talk about, is that if you're really pinned down and focusing on what you know, then you can look at a possible story or possible whatever. When I say story, I mean that could be on your blog, it could be anywhere. But then you'll be able to look at that and quickly understand where the story is inside of that. So that's it's. Then once you do that, so if you're trying to write outside the realm, I recently wrote one on health and fitness, exercising and diet things of air show performers. And while we all try to exercise, and obviously we all eat every day, I'm not an expert on diet. I'm not a dietary technician, and I exercise about as much as everybody else. So I didn't go into that thinking I'm an expert at this. I'm going to write about it as an expert. I didn't. So I had to do extra work on that particular story to take what the subject people, I interviewed 8 of the A-list air show performers, take what they told me and then go do some additional research on my end to find out, okay, so they're talking about glycemic levels. They need to keep their glycemic levels up right before they perform. They don't want to have a drop in glycemic levels as they're upside down in an air show. That sounds like a really good idea to me, but I didn't know what glycemic levels were. I mean, I had a rough idea, no more than anybody else. So I would take that and I'd go research that for a minute and figure out, okay, this is what they're talking about. And then, so anything you don't understand, really, then I go research it. Yeah. But as far as the basis of the story, if you contact somebody and you want to write about them for your blog, maybe they're a customer that's using your product and they're having really good success with it, they'll be able to say, send me back, a good one page of just the elevator speech of why you're doing what you're doing and how it's successful. And they'll send that back to you, and that'll give you the foundation for it all, what they're doing, why they're doing it, how they're doing it, how they're being successful. And then from there, you can you'll have to look at a few other little side roads here to go off in this direction or this direction and maybe do some research in that. But if you already know that niche, then that makes everything super easy.
Wow. I like that what you just mentioned about the air show pilots. I never thought that they would have a specific or kind of geared specific diet and exercise for what they do. That's intriguing. Where can people find that article to read it? Or is it out yet?
Yes, it is. It's on Air and Space Smithsonian Magazine's website. I don't have the title in front of me. It's just called Air Show Pilots. A fantastic picture of Patty Wagstaff doing yoga on the wing of her extra airplane. And it was shot like backlit with the sunset and everything. And she's in the whatever lotus pose or something. And the whole story went into that. Like, how do they get their head right before they go do these dangerous things? And, what they do requires just insane focus. You just can't space at any point in your thing because you're heading towards the ground at 340 miles an hour sometimes, and you're going to pull up at 10 feet off the ground. So you got to be focused. And so it was really an interesting story to find out how they eat, how they focus, how they stay sharp. I mean, they're athletes. They really are.
And what's great about that is that all of their lessons can be also transcribed to your own life in different ways because, I mean, and I know, Dan, that we might not be airshow pilots, but flying an airplane, period, requires focus. And I find that there are times when I've been flying either with my teacher or Brian, that the moments where I just lose attention just for a couple seconds, that's when things can really start going wrong and go wrong really quickly if you're not paying attention. So, yeah.
No, it was just interesting to find out from these people who do this at that high level how they focus and how they concentrate. And there was a lot. What I found was it was really interesting how they they all have, like, exactly, all of them have this procedure where, like, 4 hours before the show, they do this, 2 hours before the show, then 30 minutes. They don't talk to anybody else. Most of them sit in their car at the air show right next to the airplane with the air conditioner going if it's hot, playing their favorite music and like just getting in the zone. And I would say of the 8, probably 5 of them said they do that.
Wow.
And they listen to whatever. Michael Goulian, who we all know is one of the best in the business, listens to hard rock, and he gets himself amped up that way for the show. Other ones, I can't remember, I think it was Julie Clark, listens to classical music and brings her focus into, and Patty Wagstaff does all kinds of yoga and meditation and just really interesting things to get her in the game for that.
Mm-hmm. Wow. And that brings to mind, recently I had heard someone mention there's several studies at Stanford I just read last night, but they were mentioning the power of music for focus, that, and they were mentioning in particular classical and Baroque because it brings your heart level to a certain beat that keeps it calm. But I found it amazing, the attributes of music to building focus, that it helps you have more clarity, take in information better, just phenomenal information about using music to help your focus. So that was a really cool thing. For all of your journey in journalism, has there been anything that has stood out as been your aha greatest moment in lesson learned?
I like to say I've been on what's called the other end of the envelope. I've been an editor, and I've worked with freelancers, them sending me information. And as I've also been a graphic designer all my life, and so I've designed magazines. And so I have a really clear understanding of print resolution, how things are printed on a printing press. And so my best advice to people is if you're going to be pitching to magazines that's going to actually be printed on a printing press, you need to understand what the technical requirements are of the photographs that you send, if that's part of the deal. If it's just words, never mind. But I generally never send something that doesn't have some photographs involved. And so I tell people, go out, and if you have to do it online or take a graphics design class or something, but learn print resolution and how photos need to be sent and how big they need to be and how many pixels they need to be and that sort of technical stuff. Because the best thing I found is when I send a story into an editor, they open it up and they go, oh my God, this guy gets it. We don't have to do anything to this. The pictures are right. We just literally copy and paste them over to our designer, and he makes a magazine out of it. And so but trust me, I'd say 80% of the people that are trying to be writers don't have a clue about any of that. So when they send the photos, the worst thing they can do is send web resolution photos that they shot on their iPhone. And while they might look pretty on their computer, they're not going to work for print. And so then the editor has to go like, oh boy, I got to go find some art for this. So that's already like a little bit of a negative check against you. And so I always say, learn that piece of it if you're writing for magazines. If you're doing it for blogs, never mind. If it's just web resolution, everything works fine. Yeah. But at the same time, you have to always consider the artwork part of a story if you're writing it. Yeah. And the better you can do on that, the better. When the editor sees that and they see that package comes into you and all the assets are just really dialed in and perfect, then the next time you pitch something to them, they're going to go, oh, this guy gets it. I know it's going to come in and it's going to be ready to go. And so that it really makes it easy for them to say, yeah, let's do that next story because they know it's going to be right.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that tip because that also works for me. We just hired a producer to help us out with getting future guests and such. But in the past, I had been doing that. And some of the things that made me throw a potential guest out, unfortunately, was they would send me poor quality information from a poor picture, not a proper bio, maybe not some samples of past writing, speaking and such. Really, to make sure, even for my podcast, if I tell them, please send me a good photo, and they send me something they took with their iPhone and they look horrible in it, I don't really want to show that picture. And then it gives the person at the newspaper, blog, whatever, to do a lot more work. And it might potentially say, you know what, we don't have time for that work. We've got a bunch of other people here who've done the proper work and sent us what we need, and we're going to go with them first. So it could end up hurting you in getting the story.
Right. And that comes back to your homework of the magazine or the whatever you're writing for. If you need to look at their past issues and see what level they're doing, what quality level they're maintaining. Because if all of the pictures are just gorgeous magazine quality photos, if you're going to send photos, they better be that good. Because if they're not, they're going to do exactly what you said. They're going to go like, we're not going to use this person because we have to work too hard to figure out art. Exactly. So That's what I always say, is make sure that you do your homework and look at several back issues of anybody you want to write for, just to see the voice. I mean, there's a lot of voice. We can write in lots of voices. Do you write up? I tend to write upbeat, positive, sort of not feel good, but it's not negative. It's not dumb. You don't want to start thinking about dark stuff. And so people like that because of all of that outside in the rest of our world. And so I let somebody else write the hard news and, fact check it and make sure that they write all as many bad things as there are good things and balance it all out, et cetera. I don't write that way. I write about whatever's positive about a story. And if I need to add the other part in, if it's relevant.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, this has been fascinating having you out here, Dan. Thank you so much for coming to share your brilliance and wisdom. But don't leave yet. Let everyone know where they can find out more about you and hire you for their next magazine or a big, I'm due to be a great magazine out there listening. Share that with them.
Sure. The easiest way is to go to my blog, which is Airplanista, and that's AirPlanista.com. It's just like Fashionista, only it's Airplanista. That's my blog, and there's contact information all over there.
Fabulous. Well, I want to thank you again, Dan. Thank you for coming to Savvy Business Radio.
Awesome. Thank you.
Here's an excerpt of a talk I gave for the 99th International Organization of Women Pilots for their Christmas dinner 3 years back. Enjoy.
And so I said, you know what? As I said 6 years ago, I'm not going to let fear stop me. So I went into the airplane. I was a little nervous about how things would go, but it went off without a hitch. It was an awesome flight. We had a wonderful time, and we headed on back, and it was a phenomenal flight. But I realized I wouldn't have been able to know my limits and what I could handle, because it had been a long time since I'd been out of the airplane, if I hadn't just started. So the first thing I'll say is, whatever you have a fear of, and if you don't know if you can handle it or if you can do it, well, you don't even know if you can do it or succeed unless you start. So that was my first lesson there in that flight. The next lesson I learned, now I'm not doing these in order, I'm taking my favorite flights and telling you the lessons I learned. The next lesson I got was when we took a trip out to Martinsburg, Virginia. A dream, as I said earlier, of me and Brian is to hit all 50 states, and so we were working down the East Coast, hitting all those states. And we got to West Virginia one evening and decided to have dinner. We went to the airport restaurant, had a phenomenal dinner, and on the way back out to the airplane, my friend said to me, hey, do you need to use the the restroom before we head on out? Now, mind you, at that point, I really didn't feel like I had to go to the bathroom, but something inside of me said, maybe you should use it just in case. Well, I ignored my intuition, and I kept going toward the airplane. So just as the door closed behind us, and now the whole FBO is closed, the whole airport is closed, bam, the door's closed behind me. I realized, boom, I have to go to the bathroom. I can't. Well, I start to go, oh, boy, what are we going to do? Well, luckily, there's an airport not too far away in Hagerstown, Maryland. We also realized we needed fuel, which we'd hoped we can get at Martinsburg. But another thing I did not realize is I should check to see when things close, because in my mind, I continually think and regard things in New York time that the entire universe is open 24/7. That's not the case. So I realized next time around I should do some checking, make sure when things close. But for us, we were lucky. There's an airport 15 minutes away. I had to go to the bathroom, but hey, I could hold it for 15 minutes. We get in the airplane, and not long after we take off, I start to have a headache. And Brian said, do I want to continue to fly? And I said, nah, I'm having a headache. I'm just going to take a nap. And Brian said, well, I'm starting to feel a little lightheaded and nauseous. And I said, oh, wait. And we both looked at each other and we both said, carbon monoxide. We both realized that the heater was producing carbon monoxide poisoning in the cockpit, and that's why we were getting these wonderful symptoms. We immediately opened the window, shut off the heater, and in a few minutes we felt better. Now, here's the two things. Had I listened to my gut to start with, I would have used the restroom at Martinsburg, for one. Number two, if we didn't pay attention to our gut and pay attention to our intuition and say out loud, hey, I'm getting a headache, hey, I'm not feeling good, if we hadn't voiced those things out loud and ignored them, it could have led to much bigger problems. We could have blacked out, we could have gotten sick and nauseous, and it could have impinged on the flight, if not maybe caused an accident. So my greatest lesson learned in this one is pay attention to your intuition. When something inside of you is trying to say something to you, pay attention to it. And as I always say, pay attention to your intuition because your gut knows. So the next lesson I learned on a wonderful flight we took to Niagara Falls. It was 2011, and we were deciding we were going to go to Niagara Falls on Christmas Eve. Now, again, in this, my biggest lesson learned, be prepared and get out while you can.